I'll give it a couple of minutes before I start the slideshow, but this was one of my first engagements with making media to try and explain our subject. And after the Beanfield, this is 1986, June 1986, and I wanted to give this as an illustration to say how long ago I was talking about, because that's my son, age 2. And we made this prop for him, and I said, stand there, and he stood there, and that's why he's got that expression on. So this was some of our account of the Beanfield at the time, that the best we could do in our own media. Please pass that around. Because the kind of reputation that we had as a thing called the Peace Convoy was a sneer, basically, and it was fueled by the Daily Mail, Daily Express, Daily Telegraph, and all the usuals that tried to do a character assassination on them. And it's one of my first reasons for engaging in photography, to try and make a better fist of explaining who we are and what we were doing and why we were doing it. My first experience having left school was in 1972, the very year that I left school, and I went to a festival at the Windsor Great Park in the Queen's back garden, as it turns out. And I was there not for the politics but for the festival, just having it large as an 18-year-old. I went back a couple of years, and then in Windsor in 1974, 600 Thames Valley policemen came over the hill, and not knowing any better, I was sat on a log drinking a cup of tea, and this sergeant walked up to me, and I was expecting him to say, now come along, move along now. He didn't. He just got his truncheon and whacked me around the side of the head, and I fell off my log. I've still got the mark across my head where all these years ago, and I've never been the same since. Now, I don't mean medically, I do mean my perspective on how it all is out there. After Windsor, Stonehenge became central and became what's called the People's Free Festival. Windsor was in August, Stonehenge obviously is in June because of the summer solstice. And small numbers of people gathered in the fields around Stonehenge for 1974, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it was really quite small potatoes quite early on. And I want to emphasise that we were on the fields around Stonehenge, not currently the way it is on the summer solstice in the English Heritage event, where people gather 70,000 around in the stones. So the question of preservation's got to be asked there, right? How can you live with that all day?
We never notice it. It's when it strikes 13 you begin to work.
So Stonehenge was the biggest of the three festivals, and we developed a circuit that went around the country. There's going to be 5 of them now, isn't there? 3. Yeah, people go to villages, don't they, and complain about the church bells when they move in, like, you know, and it's completely unreasonable. One more up to this. We had this at the sumac where there's distraction by Russian boxing. But at the Stonehenge Festival, a circuit got agreed. The autumn, the May bank holiday, the summer solstice, the August bank holiday, where the public, others outside of the travelling and festival community, came along and mixed with you, and we became like Elizabethan strolling players, really, in one way or another. That your town and village hasn't got the facilities, but the travelling community provide those facilities temporarily, like the fairgrounds, if you like. And the free festivals became that, but also a lifestyle. You didn't go home between festivals. You became a traveller. You found another way of being, and especially dealing with the inner city situations during Thatcher times, homelessness. Lots of people were squatting at the time. Well, what if you didn't like squats? What if you didn't like the urban environment, dealing with the urban alienation that people were suffering from? What if 8 of you got together and bought a bus and suddenly you weren't homeless anymore? You DIY, did things for yourselves rather than expect the government to provide these things for you, and that's what I call anarchism. It's not do what you like, it's work it out with your community how best to resolve your personal circumstances such that things are sustainable. Now, I'm going to start this in a minute, but I want to try to give you that preamble, because that's the threat to a government, isn't it? The vested interest can't have you doing these things outside of that system. It's lawless, it's anarchism, it's not right. And so something's got to be done about it. Now, Stonehenge eventually became a festival that lasted, I pushed the wrong button already, was that one? Yeah, there we go. I said small numbers in fields around Stonehenge in those years, but from 1980, 82, 83 and 84 it grew to quite large numbers, something like 30 or 40,000 in the field, and it was at the 84 event was on for 6 weeks we were there. Now during that time you can really develop a society. It's a village, for heaven's sakes, like, you know. And for 6 weeks, I don't say they were all there at the same time, because Glastonbury was down the road. People came and went for the weekends that I've just told you about, that people had to go back to work and things, but they got exposed to the lifestyle. You might argue that something like 200,000, 250,000 might have been through that event over that 6 weeks. Suddenly we're getting a bit big for our boots, aren't we? Like, you know, and it demonstrates the threat that I've outlined. It turns out that the year before, the miners had a bit of to do with the government, that some people here will know about, and county policing up to that point was that people went across a county boundary, and it was no longer the business of the police in that region. People went from one county to another. That they frequently didn't tell the other county that some of these people were on the way, and so consequently, as far as they were concerned, the job was done. Now that's what that was kind of the idea of what was going on with flying pickets with the miners' strike. That people went from one region to another to support their compadres, but also to try and run wings round the county policing that was contained. It goes back to the Middle Ages, policing by consent by region. In 1984 they developed the Central Reporting Unit on the 5th floor at Scotland Yard, and that meant that the commonality of policing suddenly became much more oppressive. Outside of the county policing by consent ideal, like, it suddenly turned into what looked like militarism. They defeated the miners, and that's the industrial process of the thing, and especially in this region and up to Yorkshire, if you go out from the county, you'll find the dregs of that now, as it currently pertains. Anyway, they were defeated in the field, and the government looked at the situation and thought, well, we've still got these tools, what's outstanding? Oh, look, there's us lot. And because of the threat that we pertained to them, the same tools were applied to big industrial sets of circumstances to these weedy hippie families, and it was completely inequitable, basically. Before the Beanfield, the Stonehenge situation, there were a number of altercations with policemen through the late 1984. And then into early 85, some of us set up camp at Molesworth and Alconbury and Greenham Common. And the commonality between those groups, those are RAF stations that held the United States cruise missile nuclear deterrent. And so the peace convoy, the sneer that I've just described, peace, you know, the original label was given to the peace convoy when they went to Greenham Common and set up a festival next to the base. It was also used as a sneer because the violence that started to happen wasn't from the side of the hippies fighting the police, it was the police fighting the hippies. And so in the press this got painted as we were a load of violent anarchists intent on doom and destruction if we weren't opposed. So the tools that are about to be applied here, my son, bottom right hand corner at the time, you can see the expression, what the hell is all this like? It's hell of an education. Yeah, no, he's grown up with a bit of background, I have to tell you. So there, we gathered, going to Stonehenge, this is the 1st of June. We'd already been down a number of different locations. We'd come down from Warwickshire. Other people had come up from the southwest and London, and we were all converging around the Wiltshire area with a view to going to Stonehenge. We had been told of a thing called the High Court injunction, because there's no laws about the gathering that I'm telling you about now, other than a civil matter. The Public Order Act hadn't been invented by yet. So there we all were doing what we would have traditionally done for the previous 11 years, trying to get to Stonehenge, and suddenly there's all these policemen, in this instance around the Swindon bypass, and we're on the way. So a High Court injunction, I was one of the named people on the injunction as an organiser of the Stonehenge Festival. Well, I wasn't, because I've just told you all about the anarchy and things. But previously, I had been a London ambulance man for 6 years in London, living in a street of squats, would you believe? Operating in a disciplined uniform service, so I got some training. And having got that training, I looked at this community and thought they needed more welfare. You can't be an anarchist and just take from the authority. You try and develop these things yourself. So if you've got a festival and then all these people go to the local hospital when they're breaking arms or feeling ill or whatever, that's the benefit of having a charity like Festival Welfare Services to triage some of that work. So if it was really necessary to go to a hospital, you went to a hospital. Otherwise, we'll try and deal with what we can on the field. So they misconstrued my activities with a proper charity of the Festival Welfare Services as it being organiser of this event. So anyway, I'd been in court some time before to say that I wasn't, but they didn't listen, so they gave us this injunction. Now, in convoy, we had been, the object of a convoy is that it's not a military attack unit. It's a bunch of people that break down lots with the kind of vehicles that they have. And they stop lots and they help each other. So that's what a convoy is like. And that has happened about 13 times to go 30 miles from Sevenoaks Forest to here. So on this occasion, we stopped again, and I got out of the truck to take photographs up and down, so you've seen some of the convoy pictures that have gone past, to witness this. About 30 cops in full kit running up the road with an angry face, with glass smashing all the way along. And I could already see the violence of them dragging people out of the front seats through the windscreens that they've just broken by their hair, because hair was quite a big thing at the time. And it's more than obvious that we were in for a pasting. And myself and about 300 vehicles turned right through the hedge here onto the first field. Having done that, it's become obvious the reason that we stopped there was about 8 tonne of gravel had been put in the road in front of us, and an entire policing operation was apparent. Now, we hadn't seen anything like this at a free festival before, but you can see that sort of image on the miners in the previous year, can't you? So that's what I talk about, the equipment that they'd already had, and thought, well, we've got all of this, what are we going to do next? And you know, I might feel honoured to some extent that we were thought useful to attract this amount of opium. So anyway, I've told you that I was an ex-ambulance man working in a charity. I'm a general hippie traveller that wanted to be there. I'm a photographer, and with that charity I thought I might be useful in setting up negotiations between senior police with a label as opposed to just an attendee. And that I might be able to negotiate a withdrawal or something or other, but I was threatened with arrest by Assistant Chief Constable Grundy for persisting in my efforts to try and mediate. What that means to us, I believe, is that they were acting under a political direction, that the law was a cloak. The High Court injunction was just a device to enable them to give us a pasting and teach us a lesson. There's very little law going on here now. It's not the principle of minimum force to effect an arrest. It's just thuggery. It's just thuggery. Individual cops might well have the idea of what proper policing is, but they were told about this violent anarchist thing, that we were intent on some violence. There might be petrol bombs. There was a suggestion we might even be armed. And so, if you're a uniformed officer and being told that sort of thing in the warehouse when there's 1,600 policemen involved in this operation, by the way, from five forces on mutual aid. Having been told this briefing by ACC Grundy, you might well feel as though you need to be a bit more forceful than you otherwise would be. The injuries like this that I found, that particular chap, I looked at him and we've got unequal pupils. Unequal pupils of the brain injury. Now, when a policeman hits somebody, they've got directions to do the upper arm or the chin. They hurt right next to the bone. You're not supposed to whack them around the side of the head, which is my experience in 1974, and this chap's then. Yeah, it has to make a conscious decision to apply force up here. You have to aim, don't you? You're not just hitting. So that's part of the punishment that I'm telling you about. I thought he might die, actually. As an ex-ambulance man, the ambulance service said, well, are we okay to come on to take these patients off? They were worried about it, and I said, look, I've done the job in the past. I understand your concern, but there's no issue with public service. It's the police that obviously people are ranged against. So we're able to get him through the lines and get him taken to hospital. I was frightened that having taken him through the lines, they wouldn't let me back in again, but they did. So I had family on the field, and I'm trying to take all of these pictures. I'm trying to do the medicine, and I'm trying to negotiate with senior coppers, and so it was a busy afternoon. Didn't do any of it properly in my view. We need more staff for this sort of stuff. So we went into we set off from Savernake Forest at about 12 o'clock. As I say, it took us about 2 hours to do 30 miles. I think we were on the field in a really hot sunny June day. I mean, it's about 80 degrees that day, as I recollect. I think this lot's about 4 or 5 hours in the field, with the policemen out on the road, the people in the field, a hedgerow between, and a great deal of nervousness and concern on having seen some of this up on the road about what was going to occur. Yeah, another head injury, for heaven's sake. When you've seen 8 head injuries, you know that this is a deliberate plot. I mean, how they don't think hitting somebody around the side of the head with a sizable baton that they've got then. I mean, if you kill somebody, then you would have thought that there might be more accountability to that particular constable. So be careful. But if they think that you are what they've just been told in briefing, then it lets the dogs off to some extent. That's Mr. Grundy. There he is, ACC Lionel Grundy. No, we didn't get on. As you can see, people are continually trying to remonstrate with him. But he wasn't interested. He just wanted everybody to come off the field and be processed, was his expression. So anyway, this is about 5 minutes to 7, and they've decided they're coming on. they're coming on with this amount of kit, and people started to drive around in vehicles. Now, there would be dead policemen if people drove at those policemen on foot, wouldn't there?
Yeah.
But there weren't any dead policemen. People were making their best efforts to drive around knowing what was coming and to try and get away. That is a 6-month-old child being held up there to the police just before that windscreen went down. It's apparent what Mum's trying to do, but it didn't make any difference. So this is the field we first of all went on. That where they're trying to go, they're trying to find another way off the field. That is the famous Beanfield. And then I got arrested. That's the end of it. So we retired. We went through a legal process. 573 people were arrested by 1,600 policemen, both at the Beanfield and at Stonehenge. What their planners didn't seem to do is have any idea what to do with 573 people having arrested them. So some people were taken up to Birmingham. I was taken to Southampton, Bristol, Amesbury. Some went to West London. You're not locking them up in prison yet. This is a process of putting them in police stations, and before you put them before the magistrate to say these geezers have committed an offence. So some people had been round quite a long way in the legal process, and 2 or 3 days later we get invited to take our vehicles back out the pound. What was left of our vehicles, taking them out of the pound? Some of these were quite, well, I mean, you might have seen them on a Miss Marple movie, for heaven's sakes, like, you know, 1948 Bedfords and things like. I mean, now they have vehicle rallies where people polish those and show off their, you know, and, well, some of these were of that sort of age and care, I might say. But these removals folks, what the police hadn't done, this lot did a bit more, as you can see by the way they suspend that vehicle there. You know. You're looking at somebody's family's home. That's where they live. Part of the policing of this exercise, as I say, wasn't just to commit the to enable them to arrest and then charge and then go through the legal process. It's attempting to decommission the convoy. I.e., why people have vehicles, an extensive is for comfort. I mean, you don't. If you're not living in a house, what do you want? 2-man tent, or you know, in a street corner or something. I mean, vehicles have got form for supporting and being comfortable since there was vehicles, for heaven's sakes, like, you know. That's the contents of my truck. That's a search. There's jam spread on the kids' clothes and things. That's our communication from one track to the convoy. It never worked at all. That was CB radio, so that was a waste of time. Yes, I've been done. There you go. I then pointed out that I didn't want the vehicle under these conditions because I wish it to be recorded, because I should be taking action against the police, and I hope that's okay with you, Inspector. So they then, yeah, my first aid kit in that bag there with bandages all over the floor and so on. Does it look like a search? I don't know. That's with kids' beds up there, everything's on the floor. I'm showing you my vehicle on the inside. Well, I'll show you some more later on of other vehicles, but this is completely common, you know. Anyway, these evidence gatherers, I had the inspector instructed them to take pictures of the inside of the truck such that they knew some shit was coming down the pike. That's the principal one I want to stop on. I hope it does. The pictures that you've seen so far, man, how am I going to do this?
Pause first.
Well, I thought I'd paused it.
Yeah.
Look, it's still going.
Right in the middle.
Middle. Oh man. No, I know where it is. It's 1543.
So hit that pause button first, Tash, the double block thing, right in the very centre.
It was the.
Okay, that's
Yeah, no, it was
that's
the
fine.
space bar. Ross, I
That's
could have
fine.
been doing that. Look, I bugged it up completely. 1843. That's the only one I wanted to stop at, for God's sake. So.
Trendy, eh?
Run from there, really.
Space particle, is it?
Yeah, it's the space bar that's best, isn't it? Yeah, so I mean, having some sort of legal idea, I wasn't just prepared to accept this as a search. So you know, in the middle of all this mayhem, I complained to the senior officer to say, I want this recorded, mate, because we're all going to court. I hope you realise that. And he looked a bit askance, because the rest of us are supposed to be in our shell trying to run away after all of this violence, but I still tried to keep some kind of idea of a British citizen being subjected to this, and this is not right, is it? So that's the film that I found in the back of my truck during this search. So you've seen so much work that I've done, but it's only about a third of what I took. The rest of it had been stripped out and exposed, because they probably recognised that there was going to be some shit coming down the pipe. And it's completely amazing how, I mean, there's lots of unexposed film there where I was still going, but I'd taken work and then taken it back to the truck and got another film. I had a bag of film in my pocket, but I was getting through it, like. And it's still amazement to me how some of the fruitier bits that I'd taken ended up getting exposed, but some of the stuff that you've just seen didn't. I mean, it's got to be statistics. You can't look at an unexposed roll and think they don't like this one, like, you know. So, although I've told you I'm an ambulance man dealing with first aid, a family man, I'm a police negotiator, and I'm trying to get all of this down on film. Some of you will have seen Operation Solstice, a film that we made some years after this, and there's footage there of Kim Sabido, who's an ITN reporter who reports from the field and tells you how awful everything is. I was stood next to the BBC crew, and a senior officer said, "Clear off, get off the field," and the BBC left the field. Right. So there's Ben Gibson of the Observer. There's a friend, Tim Mallion, who's now died, and there's myself, and there's the ITN crew, and that's the only material that is available for you to see what happened. Now, anywhere in a war zone, I mean, Kim Sabido had been an international journalist who had seen some shooting and some bombing, and the piece to camera, he looked genuinely shocked, as the rest of us were, because it was so out of character to British policing, you know. But anywhere else in the world, you'd expect journalists, including currently Gaza, where they're not allowed for their own safety, it turns out. You expect journalists to go to places where they're not supposed to be or are at risk, because we observe. That's how democracy works, isn't it? You have to have an informed population so that you know what the bloody hell is going on, like, you know. The BBC left the field, and I'm not letting them forget that 40 years later when they want to talk to me next week, because it's the anniversary and things. So the media are only ever interested in anniversaries, it turns out. We retreated to Savernake Forest. We've got various legal firms involved. Bernberg's was one of the ones that was going to help represent us. They started to take statements. We're licking our wounds. We've got the vehicles back as well as we can from the pound. We've started to get more people arriving thinking they were coming to a festival. And of course, we're now at a refugee camp where you know, there's a bit of a different ethos going on now. We're looking for support, really, rather than partying. I told you about the miners. Some hippies, for want of a better expression, went to the coalfields in the year before and helped provide food, blankets, support to that community that were up against it. Mutual aid, support. I have to say there was 5 van loads of miners came down from the South Yorkshire coalfields to Savernake and helped. our situation. So, yeah.
Yeah. Solidarity.
Obviously, being what we are, there's got to be music. You've got to try and do what you can for the to the atmosphere, like, you know. But there's no main stage and no awkward playing and nothing like this. Like, but it turns out that the Savernake Forest, where we set off from and retreated to, was owned by Lord Cardigan. And the press were quite rude to Lord Cardigan because he wouldn't let the police come on to, quote, finish the job, which is what they wanted to do. And he said no, because he and the Daily Telegraph editor Charles Moore was on a motorbike and witnessed the Beanfield, would you believe? And he was the Tory party chairman, for God's sakes, at the time. So he and Charles Moore had witnessed what had gone on. The owners of the land, in the shape of Lord Cardigan, said they're not going to do this. No. And the right-wing press pointed to the fact his ancestor was Lord Cardigan, who commanded the charge of the Light Brigade at Balaclava. They can be right vicious, can't they, in trying to minimise anybody that sticks up for you in one way or another, you know? Completely out, I mean, when was that, 1820 or something? No relevance whatsoever. You can see the state of other people's vehicles in all of this. Like, so I went around doing what you saw those policemen doing to mine, and many of these pictures were used in the later court case. 573 arrests, with a bit of searching and heaving about. 24 of us took civil action in the High Court against these bastards for doing this. I don't mean the individual troops, really. I mean, as I say, they've just got briefed accordingly. But I wanted accountability from the senior managers that had done this. Tim, that's the other photographer that I was telling you about in the centre there, that's sadly no longer with us. So there's only three photographers and 2 camera crews, and that's all there is on the day in question. Here, everybody and their grandmother turned up with a picture and wanted to interview people widely after the event and so on. It took, well, yes, this was 85. It turned into a refugee column hereafter. We had another go at gathering in that area at Stony Cross the following year. And other festivals were not really, it wasn't supported by enough people because of the intimidation that this represents. With this alternative lifestyle I'm trying to tell you about, you have to have an economy, you have to have some kind of input and output for it to be supported. Otherwise you're just reliant on the dole, and that's not really good. That's not really good enough for these anarchist types. If you think that you want to do something, as you say, you've got to be supported by a local community to manage. So the Bajabas were scared out of people by associating with these types, and the economy collapsed. And year after year, it ended up as a bit of a refugee column, in my opinion. I with the charity trying to provide service, lasted for another couple of years, and some people went abroad because of the difficulty in lifestyle here. I came to Nottingham at this point to study photography at the university, and thought this is an opportunity for me to do something else and try and get a bit more muscular about what it is that I thought I could do. It was when after 3 months of being here on my first degree in photography, I had to go to Winchester Crown Court for the following 3 months. When they finally got the date for the hearing, and my course leader, who had been a Greenham woman, it turns out, was quite supportive of me buggering off having just arrived. The court case lasted about 3 months, another 3 months. We were very severely painted by the opposition in one way or another, and we had to try and defend what it is that we were doing. And after that period of time, the jury found for us that it was unlawful, it was excessive violence, it was beyond what the High Court injunction were trying to do, and they awarded me £25,000. Thank you very much. However, a bit of legal shenanigans in the final 2 hours after 3 months by the judge meant that there was some ambiguity about one of the questions the jury was asked, and he said, oh, well, in that instance, half costs each, all right? That was £7 million.
Oh.
And so the police had to pay £3.5 million. And oh, you've got £25,000. Well, we'll have that against the £3.5 million. So I still owe £3.5 million, I suppose, but nobody's mentioned it since. Which is just as well. Some of these people that were on the road for the previous 10 years had been homeless, some had been unemployed, some had well, I say mental illness, but some kind of deviation. It's when you suddenly find somewhere to be and you are surrounded supportively, you find your niche, don't you? And so I've always thought we needed to send a bill for the health service for the rehabilitation that we were able to do by our DIY attitudes. And so after this, it was a great deal of falling apart. There really was. It was no longer the proud race and enablers that I thought I'd signed up to. So as I say, that's when I got off the boat and did something else. What I should be talking about next week at the Sumac as a bit of an ad is that I then found the DIY sound system that happened to start off in exactly the same period of time that became much more of an optimistic alternative in one way or another, and I hopped the fence from being a hippie traveller to a new raver, I think. And it turns out that much of the travelling community who are experienced at living outside supported that lifestyle, so it wasn't a complete jump. We did try and encourage people to stay a bit longer than having it large for a few hours overnight, which is what it essentially boils down to. Yeah, 7-8 Forest. It's a very nice place to be. It's it would have been a lovely festival site in my view. But we did have the vision that by going to Stonehenge, it's not so deviant really. How long have people been going to Stonehenge to celebrate and to be tribal, and who's us? It's 3,000 years to 5,800 years. I mean, there's about 2,000 years of construction in one way or another. And I reckon I'm part of whatever people were doing there. I'm one of them, you know. And suddenly it became an offence to be on that ground. English Heritage and National Trust had just, well, National Trust is an ancient organisation. English Heritage had just been invented, and they owned the ground. Apparently, it was theirs, you know, and so that's why we were trespassing. So that's a civil matter, and hence the High Court injunction. After all of this, it was decided, and then the Stony Cross the following year. I showed you a picture of that bus at the beginning, the same view. That's how it came out. The law had changed, basically, that we can't be doing with all of this, and the following year the Tory government, with Douglas Hurd, who was the Home Secretary at the time, went off about a band of medieval brigands who have little respect for law or the rights of others, I believe was the quote. And he introduced the Public Order Act.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, pots, kettle, black,
Yeah,
and so on
a
like
bit
that.
of projection there.
And we got our very own section in the Public Order Act of Section 39, that if 3 people bring with them 12 vehicles on a piece of land for the common purpose of residing there, and they don't move when confronted by a policeman in uniform, then they commit an offence. So for the first time since medieval since Elizabethan times, they had a bit of a downer on being a gypsy at the side of the road was an offence, didn't they? So that's the first time since that you had criminal trespass. And you've got to have more than 3 vehicles, and you've got to have more than 12 people, and obviously that's a target at my sort. So suddenly it's an offence to be. You don't have to do anything else in a criminal nature. You just have to be, and then you commit this offence. So that's basically the end of it in that respect. Thereafter, it's on the side of lay-bys or sympathetic farmers that might let you stay in the barn without anybody noticing, and so on. So it's no longer the alternative culture that's got something to say about the other way that we can do things. We just don't want to be reliant on the man. The only lawful way of proceeding is to live in a house, work until you drop, and then forever using some here will know how old you have to be to get to the pension age and how that's moving up. They want to really wring it out of you, don't they? Like, you know, life isn't just about the process of earning and then surviving and then getting retirement and then dying. There's got to be a bit more about it in one way or another in what you think you're doing here, like, you know. So this is part of that experiment. Apart from the vehicles that you see in a bit of a straight state, even before the police got to them, there was a fair amount of exhaust came out the back, and you can't say that they were entirely environmental. But they didn't move every day. They only moved from one site to another and then turned off, like, you know. So that's a defence, I have to say, to treading lightly on the land in one way and another. Like, there's a fair number of people that didn't have vehicles, and they drove around in horse and carts, bow tops and so on. There's a fair number of others that became, before the convoy was invented, Tally Valley, if anybody knows where that is, in West Wales. They live in Indian teepees and have been there for the last 50 or 60 years. And another one, Llywyn Piod. That's our early means of media before Festival I, with Castetna. Yeah? You don't have to have electricity to run one of those. You know? These were all experiments in alternative life, and when I go off about the wider festival scene, I'll say that some of us drew our inspiration politically from the end of the Civil War and the levellers and the diggers. The people trying to say, this is before the Enclosure Acts, the first one was 1733, putting up a fence around a common saying this is ours and not yours. Some of these arguments go back to it's the Stone Age. It's hunter-gatherers versus the farmers. I mean, how do you allocate the relevant rights of either side of that? Both have got a noble tradition. But unless the hunter-gatherers have got room for the farmers and the farmers have got room for the hunter-gatherers, there's going to be conflict, as there always has been. But if the law is going to continually side on the side of ownership of land, because the commons are only common between those that graze sheep on it, and we don't have access to the rough land because it's owned by somebody else. This is private property. You cannot be here. They've put a sign saying no entry. And there's a mountain, you know. You can get quite cross about it because when it comes to alternative lifestyles, you can't have one unless you've got somewhere to be. Land is the fundamental denominator between all of it. Whether it's squatting, whether it's a lifestyle of this sort, whether it's the lot at Teepee Valley. They try to say at teepee valley, when you've got, I don't know whether you're used to the structure of a teepee, but you've got poles that wrap around. You've got a deer skin or a lorry tarpaulin, as it turns out, that goes around one side, and then you tie a rope around the top and you pate it to the to a peg in the middle, and that keeps the structure square. They made an effort to say that because the peg that held the rope tied to the rope at the top went into more than 18 inches, that made it a structure that was inside the planning laws. And consequently, the people had to move their structures around and not tie them down as much as they should do. To get round, there's no way that that's a sensible. There's a sensible law that you can't just build what you want where you want, but that's clearly a device to say we don't like this sort of activity in Ireland. It turned out that about those times the milk price collapsed for some of the farmers. Was it the milk marketing board? And there was a bit of a deviation about the economy of the thing, and lots of farmers went bust and couldn't support themselves. And it was an opportunity, if only we had some money, to buy some land from these defunct farmers. And I put it to a couple of people, if only we could raise the funds, we could buy Wales. And then be able to do what we wanted when we wanted to do it in our own state. But anyway, it never came to be, did it? After the Savernake Forest, we drove on to another site at Westbury White Horse, just on the other side of the plain, when the military started up live firing exercises between us and Stonehenge, so that they didn't want us going along the byways and having another crack at it, because there's a chieftain tank with live shells charging about. So that was another way of policing, as it turns out. In spite of our experiences with the police, you can still see people playing a saxophone and a guitar, entertaining the troops. We are quite resilient, really. I mean, a lot of people would have tried to kill them. I got invited back to the Beanfield well, as it turns out, almost exactly a year ago, and I was invited to contribute to a Channel 4 programme about Stonehenge at large, but I mean in this particular bit. And when I went there, I got interviewed, stood in the field saying this is all awful, this is where we did this, this is where we did that. And somebody's put that up, so I thought that needs a blue plaque. I mean, some places you go, you've got a little cross swords or something. The Battle of Naseby was here or something like that. Along the hedgerow, I've been back a couple of times, and you can get a trowel or dig about like, and you can find bits of rubber or bits of broken glass in the hedgerow to this day. And in other situations like Naseby, you'd find musket balls, you'd find ends of pikes and things, and you'd call that archaeology, wouldn't you? Like, And you can still do that to this day with the situation that I've just described to you. Like, so that's battle archaeology right there. And yeah, 40 years ago, you can still find rubber surrounds of the windscreens. You can find bits of broken glass. You can find an old exhaust pipe tail. It's still there if you want to have a look. I do believe that's the end of it.
Wow.
Just round the bend.
Rarely had a speaker who keeps to the exact time.
Amazing.
I'm going to turn this off actually. Is that okay?
I was going to leave the web address up in case anybody wanted to see any further bit. I thought it was going to be at the end of that, but it hasn't really worked out, has it?
What's the name again?
No, never.
What is the website?
AlanLodge.co.uk, and it's simple enough to write down if you wanted to see the rest of my work. Yeah, so we'll
Do questions and answers.
I met someone who came back, somewhat battle scarred, traumatised from the events, and his experience was just him, or he said others, when they were able to retrieve their vehicles, the ones that were towed, They were given back, handed over. I can't remember what the process was. Took some time, got them, and almost all the vehicles in his group they were allowed to leave with the motors running 5 miles down the road, or up to 10 miles. They would all break down, all of them, and they all found the same thing. That the
And
police
they all
would
had
deliberately put
yeah.
ground glass into the fuel tanks to let them destroy their engines.
Yeah.
Good God.
They said, good luck, bye bye, and then you separate.
Yeah, no, I mean, some had sumps drains, so there wasn't oil when you run it, and obviously that sugar in the tank and all the rest of it. I mean, the Beanfield showed a much more up muscular approach by hitting the windows. I mean, in this country it rains lots, doesn't it? So suddenly you haven't got you haven't got the integrity of the shell of the vehicle. So trying to bring up kids under these conditions with wet bedding, surrounded by strawberry jam and things, isn't a sustainable set of circumstances at all, is it? Like, you know. Go on, Ronnie.
I was 11 at the time, and I remember the media calling it the Battle of Beanfield as it unfolded. Who came up with that phrase?
I can't remember now, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I told you about the peace convoy being a bit of a sneer, and I suspect that it's the same sort of thing. Like, I mean, I've written about it on the website, which I was illustrating there. And part of my story was, well, it wasn't a battle; it was an ambush. It was an ambush.
Yeah.
And a battle is, you have protagonists, don't you? And they do that. We weren't going to Stonehenge by any force necessary. I mean, otherwise we would have used the vehicles as battering rams. There'd be lots of dead policemen all over the place, and we would have got to where we wanted to go. What we would have done then, I don't know. I have no idea. So, peace convoy was a sneer. The battle of the Beanfield. I mean, people know what you're talking about when you say that, don't they? So it's an easy label, but it's not an accurate one. I quite agree. Like,
I also heard that some of the ITN crews and the mass media at the time went back to their respective editorial offices, and a lot of footage was seized.
No, it wasn't seized, it disappeared.
Disappeared, right?
Yeah. Now they're still trying to find out what happened to that, especially in I mean, I'm so tired of this. Anniversaries mean media suddenly spark up an interest. Nothing's going to happen now about the Beanfield until the 50th. That'll be it. But I've done about 18 interviews of late because they've suddenly noticed it's on the calendar. You know. There's got to be another way of doing this. I mean, other things need investigating. That's what a public inquiry would do. And the issue pertains all the time, doesn't it? But it's only an anniversary that you get the public exposure. Meanwhile, of course, the world's going to turn round and other things will happen, and then you get forgotten about in the bottom of the pile, don't you?
Just a matter of interest, was there ever an inquiry into it? You know, was anybody ever held properly accountable?
No.
Could you repeat the question for the people at home?
Was there ever an inquiry? I've been asked. There was, in the shape of the High Court civil action that I took against the police.
Yeah.
And as I say, we've found against the police that they exceeded what they should be doing as police officers. I would like a government inquiry. I've just been to a thing at the Sumac where there is an inquiry going on with Lord Justice Mitting and the way that people have been treated by undercover policing. God, don't it take years? I mean, they try to wind it down so that everybody gets pulled, nobody's interested anymore, and something else has happened. And by doing it so long, it minimises the device that is supposed to get some recompense for the way that you have been treated. I mean, in other cultures, I mean, you might take up arms in a civil insurrection for the way that you are treated, you know. But we're a bit more mild-mannered in this country, aren't we? Like, I'm not necessarily going to start the Judean People's Front or the People's Front of Judea to take them on, the bastards. Like,
There's one here and then one at the
You said after it all happened, that the convoy fell apart, and you didn't like what was happening. Can you say a bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah. People gather together. If you don't like your neighbours, you move, and then you move next to somebody that you do get on with. It's much more fluid and able, and that way you get strength of character. I mean, it takes a couple to have a child, and it takes a village to bring one up. Is a phrase, and I applied that to my own children. That it's not just me and my partner bringing them up, but anybody that I trusted around me. So that model taken large is something of what we're trying to achieve, isn't it? Like, that it's not just about individual action, it's about group action in one way or another. Time goes along for the next couple of years, and we're not able to support, to the extent that we've done for the previous 10 or 15 years, a society, a commonality, a supportive tribe. And I want to say drugs now. There's good drugs. I'm quite in favour of good drugs, but I'm against bad drugs. And heroin is one of those. And if you've been hurt and you really don't like your life, what you can do is take heroin and everything is nice. But it's so antisocial. There's no feeling about others. It's all me. And and a certain amount of alcoholism with special brew. Carlsberg special brew. It's worse than heroin. But those two elements started to seep into the edge of this community, and the economy, as I've just told you, it was light, lots of bartering and things, but suddenly when buying heroin in this kind of system, you've got to find money for the man, and the economy collapses, and you've no longer got that shared tribal identity and looking out for each other. Some of the people that have been through this, I would have trusted with my kids 10 or 15 years earlier. For days, while I went away and done something else. At the other end of this, I wouldn't let them anywhere near some people because of the character had so changed. Sometimes they might have come from that mental background and reverted. I've just told you we did some repair work on them, for people. Others just couldn't cope with what they'd just seen and just dissolved into a beer keg, and that was it. You just watch society and the strength of community go right down the tube.
Got 1, 2.
I'm just interested in what.
Can you speak up a bit?
Yeah, sorry. I'm interested in what the police or the politicians actually offered in terms of an explanation or defence once they went to court. With the spy cops stuff, clearly they spent a long time just saying no comment and seeking not to engage. And in Augury the previous year, they just lied and reconstructed it and suggested that the miners had charged the police, and the narrative there was we were attacked and we were defending ourselves until that was exposed. But at the time, was there how did they try and then handle that, given that they probably weren't expecting the convoy and to actually go on more an offensive and say we demand our rights? How did they respond, both the police and the politicians?
I said I didn't think it was a law thing. I said I thought it was a political thing. Yeah. But when you're in a high court in Winchester, you can't say it's all political. You've got to say, well, these things were the people were acting against the civil injunction that Lord Justice Morland had said they must not do. And so. The police were only doing what they were asked to do by the High Court judge. That's the end of it, isn't it? Really, they will police a High Court injunction up to a nuclear bomb if they need to, as far as I can see. But the politics of the situation, I think that there was, I can't remember where I read it now, But the backstage, the government were concerned about the trade union action in the shape of the miners, and the travellers as being two threats to civil order in the country. I was saying earlier, I kind of honoured, as well as alarmed, if you attract that amount of opium from authority, you must be thinking that you're doing something right. But it is a hell of a way to find out, isn't it?
Kate and then Mick.
Yeah, I mean, I was 7 years old when the government came
No, don't.
But 10 years later, when the criminal justice bill was being introduced, at which point, you know, having made it illegal to have 3 bands and 12 people on land, they then actually started making particular kinds of music illegal in order
Yes.
to crack down.
Yeah.
And I mean, then I remember, you know, being told by the kind of more experienced people in the movement about how they had demonised the travellers and how the police had sold heroin to the traveller communities, and they had encouraged and the way that they were politically attacked. And I think also one of the things that we're looking at now as boycott stuff is the way that civil injunctions are used against political groups, and it's something that you start to see later on, the Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty campaign, some of the climate activists, the genetic engineering activists, they take out civil injunctions, and what it does is it turns a political action into contempt of court, and it removes all the political content from it. So they take out these political injunctions, but then breaking the injunction, when you go to trial, it becomes, as you say, it becomes a matter of contempt of court, and it's nothing to do with the politics or the reasons. And so I think it's a really important area to understand. Is this
The Criminal
way that
Justice
they
Act.
use the civil courts instead of the criminal courts.
Yeah. The Criminal Justice and Public Order Act, it's called, in 1984, and it outlawed listening to music that was characterised by a succession of repetitive beats. It's the famous one, isn't it? Section 39 of the Public Order Act is 12 people bring with them 3 vehicles on a piece of land for the common purpose of residing there. That's the offence. I told you I got involved with the sound systems a bit later, and they didn't reside there. They stayed up all night and made a racket, right? And I say that was the way around that law, and that's why they put after Carson Walton, that's why the CJA was brought in. Its main target was protest, as well as us, and so the environmental protest movement with the climate camps around that time, I suppose, were then subjected to section 61 to 65 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. So that was the next turn of the screw. More recently, we now have the Police Crime Courts and Sentencing Act, which makes protest illegal under vast numbers of circumstances. And just last year, they enacted the Public Order Act 2023. So that's 4 now. I'm telling you, they're not finished yet.
ID cards coming now.
I really encourage people to check out
God's sakes,
because yeah, he didn't stop, as he says, at the Battle of the Beanfield, and there's loads of really interesting stuff. I've just been going through his photographs of some of the early Reclaim the Streets actions.
Oh, God.
Because we're working efforts about that from the Spy Cops inquiry, and there's a fantastic resource on our website about all that. So definitely encourage you to take a look.
Also, you can follow him on Facebook. He posts very regularly old photographs and new photographs. Mick.
I am the Lorax, I speak for the Stones. Yeah. What we haven't done is talked about the Stones. And the Stones is a sacred bit of England that should not be owned by absolutely anyone. And in all of the reasons for saying that we weren't allowed to celebrate the Midsummer, they at the same time use it as a firing line for armaments. They drive tanks across land, which archaeologists are telling us is growing as a larger and larger sacred area.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we need to actually stand up for this piece of land, and we need to turf the army off it, so we can actually see our sacred environment as it should stand. And we should also be standing up against the intentions to drive a road underground through there and wreck other parts of sacred land. That's my observation. But my question is, having talked with other people who were involved with things at the Beanfield and with people who were involved here in the miners' strike, do you actually believe they were police? Or were they armed forces wearing police uniforms?
No, some we did find out in the court case were members of the parachute regiment. Now these are assault troops, and we need them if you think about international circumstances, because you don't just send regular troops in that haven't got that sort of degree of training. These are heavy guys, right? And they don't need to be applied to mild-mannered hippies in a national, local situation. Aside from that, I mean, it was as a result of this and the following events that policemen find themselves in deep water now if they don't wear numbers, because trying to recount, this copper here was this big and he hit me, it doesn't really do much about identity and accountability. So they are, I don't know if the state could just put some numbers on a parachute regiment officer and dress him up in a police uniform. You don't get any further, do you, in that respect? I would say that the pressure on the stones I appreciate, and the argument about that we shouldn't be doing it at Stonehenge means that it's stuck in a glass case. And as I say, I consider myself part of the eons of people that have gathered there. You would not put Salisbury Cathedral in a glass case and say that nobody should go there, would you? As a festival, we've always been on the fields around Stonehenge, which I feel is where people have always been, right up to the burial mounds at the back and so on. And during the festival days, only about 200 or 300 people went to the stones on the solstice.
We were all
the
too
sun.
We were all too stoned to nothing.
Well, I mean, there's lots of good drug taking in the middle, as there would have been for the previous 5,000 years. That's our case. But just of late, I was just saying this to somebody else the other day. Like the last time I went to Stonehenge, I think it was 2008. And I went to what's called the English Heritage Managed Access event. And something like 70 or 80,000 people go to this. There's a huge car park. It's open from about 7 o'clock the previous night. Everybody goes into the stones and drumming session, bit of a party. And the pressure on the monument is extreme compared with the way that we've for 6 weeks in a field nearby and we've visited. It's a complete. They haven't done it. They haven't done the stones any service for their preservation. What they have done is put the politics back in a box, and that was the objective.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to ask what will have to be the last question. Alan will be around to talk to people individually
talk to anyone
in a
that
while.
wants.
If anybody wants to buy his pamphlets and stuff, you'll have to sign them. But you, apart from the 5,000 years of history at Stonehenge, 1649 St George's Hill, the peace camps, the convoy, the raves, what do we do now? What do we, alternative types, if for want of another word, where are we? What do we do? Do we do anything? Are we allowed?
I get depressed thinking about this. I mean, there's festivals. There's huge numbers of festivals around the country. I haven't seen you at a festival for years, Tash. Well, there isn't any. No, there's outside concerts, listening to music. That's what you do at a festival, isn't it? You go and see your band. You go and see the entertainment that's provided. You buy a ticket, you pay for your own security, you pay for the infrastructure of the event, you go to see the act. A free festival, talking about the lifestyle, you are the bloody act. You are you're what people come to see you and your friends. you develop an event, and you are responsible for your own entertainment. It doesn't require paying someone else for it. It's an alternative. What happened at the collapse of all of this is loads of people buggered off abroad. Spain, Portugal, France, Romania, Czechoslovakia. There's encampments where there seems to be more room because you haven't got an act unless you've got land. So people started to go to the extremes edges of Europe where there's a bit more tolerance because well, perhaps nobody notices you're there. You know, because it's a bit of a wilderness half the time, like, you know. My son, when he got to 18 and 19, buggered off to Portugal and southern Spain. I'm sure that happened with many families. But he then grew up and developed a thing called the Dragon Festival that became quite a big thing all over the south of Spain. So, as I say, he'd been properly brought up, you know. No, I submit a certain amount of depression, actually, that we did something, we thought it could, we had something to say to others, others engaged with it and thought it could, we grew it, it was defeated in the field, and now it's dispersed, and I want it back.
Well, the one I should have mentioned was, of course, the Palestinian camps, including the one at Nottingham, but they didn't last.
No, there was a couple of people there that got threatened with their degree, didn't they?
Yeah.
Unless it all went like, you know.
Yeah, when I was thinking about this in advance, thinking of that as being the last question, I was trying to think, how would I answer that question? Is there anything? And Morris Dunson came into mind. the kind of village hall preservation society that it's not necessarily the alternative types. It's people in their own communities just doing it in the same way as, you know, there's nothing anarchist about running an allotment, but, you know, people who run allotments, they preserve the land, they're generally organic, they're self-managed, and that's why Colin Board wrote a book about allotments. You know, it's going out. These things are happening, but not necessarily without the labels.
Squeeze a balloon, and it pops up other ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, things pop up, and we find ways. We find people might remember the Richard Cobb cartoon of somebody miserably in a concrete jungle, and there's a little blade of grass growing up. We're the kind of blade of grass.
Aside from the depression that I've just told you about, you have to have the optimism, otherwise what's the point?
We're all optimistic.
You mentioned that Tash is very much involved in Nottingham Green Festival.
Green Festival.
Right up to date, you know. So that's where he's
And what's the date of Nottingham Green Festival? Because we've all forgotten.
14th of September, the second Sunday in September each year. Second Sunday in September.
And we need help. For God's sakes, we need help.
And we have made it much more conscious of its important role. You know, lovely as it was all those years, it did become a bit of a hippie task festival where we all met our friends we haven't seen since the year before. And now we've got lots and lots of people talking, and that really makes quite a difference. So people talk about it between years and say, oh, I must go there. But now people are talking at it, and hopefully more things can come from that conversation. We'll just have to see.
There's our optimism to end with.
And on the theme of hope, there are some blades of grass, and that's why I and others are doing this hope event.